the thing that did annoy me the most in the Jeet Kune Do community at that time, and in the circles that I was swinging around, is I saw a tremendous amount of hypocrisy and cynicism. And the idea was, and this was an idea that came from the top down because I heard it, was some people are fighters and some people aren't fighters. And some people will get it, and if they want to spar, they'll get it. And others, you know, they're not going to get it. And it was a kind of, it reminded me of, I'll go back to using religion as an analogy. If you're having a one-on-one debate with a religious person, religious preacher, and at some point they play the faith card and say, well, you know, we don't really know. And of course, Exodus isn't a historical rendition of what happened, and Noah's Ark wasn't real, and they didn't actually put two animals on there. It's a metaphor. And then when he gets in front of the congregation, he preaches it as if it's not a metaphor. And if you were to poll the congregation, 80% of the congregation thinks the story of Noah's Ark is a news report. And then when you call him on it, he says, well, you know, some people will understand it, some people won't. That bothers me from the standpoint of, I don't think it's just a good way to treat people or a good way to go around thinking about the world. And I saw so much of that in the JKD community. There were people who did get it to some degree, at least with the stand-up, they understood it. But there was, and you're definitely don't fall in this category at all. Like I said in the beginning when we started this conversation, you were always super positive, and everybody I've ever spoken to that knows you's had the same positive experience where you've encouraged people to pursue their own truth. But there was that, and I wonder if my experience was different from yours, or if you saw the same thing there.
No. Yeah, I think that there, in many parts of the JKD community, there's still this idea that sparring, it's too hard for people. It's rough. Now, I must say, when I first started I actually started my training in 79, and then 1980 is when I started the Kali Academy, Dan Inosanto and Richard Bastillo's school. And we trained for about 2 months, and then we were told to bring boxing gloves next week, bring boxing gloves. And so they would start a new class. They'd call everybody, hey, you're on the waiting list, we're starting a new class. So there are at least 30, I think there were more than 30, but at least 30 people started that class. 2 months later, still about 30 people in the class. I mean, it was really good training. It's very athletic training. You know, we were hitting mitts and kicking the shield and moving around and all. Then we put the boxing gloves on. We had the first sparring session. The next class, there were 7 people. And so there is that fear that, oh man, if, you know, some people just can't handle it. Maybe that's where it came from. I don't know, that kind of idea. But the truth is, if we do it intelligently, if we have people spar intelligently and add progressive resistance, vary the intensity, bring them along little at a time, just like you do in baseball. Mm-hmm. You don't take a 10-year-old and you throw, 95-mile-an-hour fastball at them. Right. You bring them along and it's fine. But that's why in my classes, somebody comes in the very first day they spar. First day, but they just go open hand and they're going to touch top of the head, cover. And so already they're in that context of aliveness and feeling that they're dealing with a resisting partner.
Right.
So that's the context. But back to what you were saying, absolutely there tend to be in some people this, we can never say all, but there tend to be a lot of people like, oh, they can't handle it. And then there were people that didn't want to do it themselves. When I started doing it wasn't called Dog Brothers when I started. So this is full contact stick fighting, which is a helmet. Some have a little hand protection, sometimes a knee protection as well. You did it, and at your school.
Yeah, we did it together when you come up.
Right, exactly. And so when I started doing that, there were a lot of people in the JKD community or the Filipino martial arts community. There were a lot of people that were like, that's stupid, that's ridiculous, that's crazy, and all this sort of thing. I heard instructors telling students, don't go near those guys. Do not. They're going to try to get you to do that. Don't do it. It's a really bad idea. Now, I have to say, to be clear, Dan Inosanto was the one that let us stay after hours. Right. And Eric Noss told me this just recently. I didn't realize it, but he'd say, okay, yeah, he gave Eric the key, I believe, and he said, okay, lock up afterwards, no killings tonight, right? And that was about it. But he encouraged us because, this is a thing. Okay, I'm going to say my point of view, everybody. For those JKD people out there, I'm going to tell you my honest point of view. I am loyal to Dan Inosanto, and I love him. He's really been extraordinarily generous with me for decades. One night in class, when I was visiting LA, and I go to his class when I go to visit, and I spend time with him also, but in teaching class, he stops and he starts talking about sparring. And truthfully, when I come, he would tend to do more sparring things because he knows me. And that would be a cue for him to do sparring things in class or talk about it. And he actually said, there's a fighting art, and then there's just, there's the art. And because I like teaching the art. And he just said it like that. Mm-hmm. Like, I know it's, there's fighting. I just like teaching the art. Mm-hmm. Now, in my experience, a lot of times people are learning the art, but they think they know how to fight.
Right.
That's an issue.
Right. That's what
a lot of the
about, without providing the context. Do you say that every time you start that section? This is art, people. We're not going to be using it for fighting. I mean, it's a fine line. And pretty soon you have 90% of the congregation believing it's a news report.
Yeah, that is an issue. And
but he was honest.
Personal.
He was honest.
Oh no, he was totally honest. That was a beautiful. Not just on the side to me. He said it to the whole class. Yeah, a very large class. He said, "Yeah, I like teaching the art."
Right.
Then he went through a whole sparring progression that he got from Bruce Lee, of course, and this and that. I think you'd find this interesting, and anybody in the JKD world, is one night I remember at the IMB Academy in Carson after he finished teaching several classes, and he was showing everything, from Muay Thai, we're doing Muay Thai stuff, and then this and that, and all these amazing things he's showing. He's walking out 10 o'clock at night. He's with another guy. I'm there. And he stops and he goes, when it comes down to it, though, it's still this. And he did a low kick and a finger jab to the eye, just the basic, like, stop kick him and hit him. So he's very aware. This guy sparred with Bruce Lee, got knocked out by Bruce Lee several times. So he understands what fighting is, but according to what he said in class, he prefers teaching the art. Mm-hmm. Now, what you would like, I think, a lot, Matt, is at the academy now there's a lot of sparring. They have a lot of classes that have sparring. They have jiu-jitsu classes that, just they're jiu-jitsu classes. There's technique and there's rolling. Right. So, there's been a lot of progress from our point of view as far as preparing people for fighting.
I mean, if I rewind the tape, and one of my regrets from the early years of SBG is we trained way too hard. The head contact was way too extreme. The jiu-jitsu was too rough. We were learning. I was learning as I went along as a coach, but I definitely both subjected myself to too much contact, and more importantly, my students at that time. I think that was not that this is an excuse, but I think that was kind of how MMA was back then, and most of the other schools did the same. And
that's how jiu-jitsu was too. Jiu-jitsu
was too.
When we did jiu-jitsu, everybody was thinking about fighting in a Vale Tudo fight when we're doing jiu-jitsu. It wasn't to do a tournament or something. Yes. We were training to use this to fight, and it was really rough. And I know I did not enjoy going to jiu-jitsu for maybe 6 or 7 years until I got good enough at it. It was just always like, I got to go. I just got to go do this.
Yeah. And the biggest evolution for us as an organization and for my other coaches and the top coaches in SBG has been learning to train more effectively with less contact and far less injuries. And so I always try, and it's one of the reasons why personally when I'm communicating with people about this, I actually try and steer away from the word sparring, only because all the things people envision when you say the word sparring.
Yeah.
In my gym now, we probably have 35-40% female. I have purple belts that are training on my mat that are in their 70s. I'm sure where you're training is very similar. And I have competitive athletes who are better than any other generation of, every generation is getting better.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It is amazing. But you can take an art like, and I love jiu-jitsu because it's there's so many people that do it now, and it's such a great way to explain teaching methods, because you can take how you teach jiu-jitsu and you can apply it to stick, you could apply it to anything. But you can train jiu-jitsu very gently and spend most of your time drilling, in the sense that SPG means drilling, which means with aliveness, in a way that my wife can do it, a young, small female can do it, anybody can do it, and get really good on the ground to the point where you're actually very, very competent. And because you can do that with jiu-jitsu, you can do it with anything. And you've been a great example of this with the stand-up and the open hand, even back way early on, which was smart because it prevents people from getting the brain damage. But it's that aliveness piece that I think is so important. It's not about, because people have this idea, well, you got to get in there. And again, I'm going back to a stereotype of Jeet Kune Do people, but for them, the other extreme was an extreme. Well, if you're going to train it that way, you're going to have people get knocked out. And maybe back then a little bit it was like that, but it's not like that anymore. And it never needed to be like that. And it never needs to be like that in order to be functional, which I think is really important, because I don't want to scare people away from training realistically. You can train and be perfectly healthy.
Yes. And that it's better that way. A couple things on that is, if you go hard like that, you're going to lose people. And what's worse, the guys I'm going to say guys, because back in that class it was guys. The guys who stayed were the ones that really didn't need self-defense.
Right? They didn't need it.
No, they were athletes. They were tough. They didn't need it. All the people that actually needed it were run off.
Yes.
So we want to bring them in slowly and make sure it's accessible to anybody who wants to put in the time and the effort and get these great, amazing benefits we get from it.